window and done that. No, I never get that frustrated. Today, Dot Loop Hour is focused on contracts, and specifically the purchase agreement. It is, we refer to this as a contract of sale. However, the attorneys would cringe when we say that. The real estate attorneys we deal with have gotten used to it. However, only an attorney is allowed to prepare a contract. But the Real Estate Commission has given all licensed real estate agents in the state of New Jersey special dispensation to complete a fill-in-the-blank purchase agreement for single-family building lots and 1 to 4 family homes. So I say that and I reinforce that. If you are trying to do a commercial deal or anything that does not meet that criteria, single family building lot or 1 to 4 family home, you are absolutely not allowed to prepare the fill-in-the-blank purchase agreement, or as we all call it, the contract. You must prepare a letter of intent. The attorneys write those contracts. So with that said, now we can get started. So I'm going to go to one of my sample loops that I have used, and it is Fred and Martha Washington. Washington, spelled that wrong, didn't I? They are preparing to make an offer on a property. So we need to fill out the purchase and sales agreement. So I'm going to open that up. If any point you have trouble seeing the screen, something blocks out, please take off your mute button and tell me right away. I can't always see the chat going on. So this first page is what we call opinion 26. Now, for some of you, you're gonna think, oh my God, I'm back in real estate school. Well, you are a little bit, because some of this stuff is extremely important to know and understand. One of the things I have found is that if I am working with a buyer and I just send them a contract, oftentimes they get a little freaked out by it because they think that they are the ones that have to find an attorney to review this contract because they don't want to sign something they don't understand. So if you understand it, and if you can walk them through the basics of it, it gives them enough comfort level so you can send it to them, they can sign it and return it without saying, well, I have to read this, or I need to give this to my attorney. Especially in this time that they're in, this market that we're in with such little inventory and everything going into multiple offers, you do not want them to take this time to review the contract. You know, 24 hours could mean them potentially missing out on getting an offer on a property and winning that, so to speak, winning that offer. So this first page is called Opinion 26. Why we give it that name is because the New Jersey Supreme Court wrote their 26th opinion about the notice before signing a contract to a buyer and a seller. So this page absolutely must be, by law, always the first page of every contract that we prepare. And it is explaining to the individual that we cannot give legal advice. They must hire their own attorney. They have that choice to hire an attorney. However, in the state of New Jersey, you do not have to use a real estate attorney in order to close a transaction. You can close a transaction with a title company. Now, most of the people from, say, Ocean County, Monmouth County, over to Mercer County and north, they are very much in tune to using this purchase and sales agreement, fill in the blank, and that's the way they do business, and recommend and use an attorney, and the buyer and seller use an attorney. However, when we go farther south in New Jersey, there are many, a majority of agents and buyers and sellers that do not use an attorney. They use this form to establish an agreement, and then they further go down the road and use a title company to close the transaction. That is their right, and that is their choice. You must declare your relationship. Again, not only have you declared your relationship with the consumer information statement by disclosing that you will work with them as a seller's agent, a buyer's agent, or a seller and a buyer's agent, disclosed dual agent, or as a transaction broker. That is a very important disclosure form for the very first introduction to working with an agent. Then the informed consent to dual agency. They always need to sign this as well, because this is saying that they are agreeing, and informed consent means they're actually signing it, that they're agreeing to allow you to work with both the seller and the buyer, or to work with another agent within the O'Brien company. Because anybody that works under the O'Brien leadership, whether it be one's working with the buyer and one's working with the seller, they are a dual agent. That's what they're considered. So this is the basis of this page. They have the right to hire an attorney if they choose not to. That is their own decision. So we need to ask them to sign this. The buyer and the seller sign this, plus listing broker and selling broker. Now, they're using broker here. We do not have to get this to Tammy for signature like we do and like we must for the listing agreement. Listing agreement must always get signed off by Tammy prior to getting it signed off by the potential client. However, this you are going to get when you get the buyer signing it, you are going to get it signed. When you are representing the listing, the seller, you're going to sign it when the seller signs it. Prepared by, that is your name. Do not forget to put your name in there. So when you've got it all prepared to send it to the buyer, make sure you sign it before sending it to the buyer and be prepared by it. All right, that is Opinion 26, the very first page of the contract. Now let's go down to the contract itself, or the purchase and sales agreement, as sometimes referred to as. This top section just basically gives a table of content to every section. You'll notice along the side, every line is numbered like any legal contract would be, which just really helps you when referring to it and discussing with others. You can say line 27 or line 26. So as you're working with your buyer, make sure to submit that, to submit their names. Again, full names of who is buying it. If it's a husband and wife buying it, both names need to be on there. If they have decided it's only going to be in the husband's names, or there are partners in the agreement, but only one partner is buying it, That is allowed. If you were in Water Cooler Wednesday yesterday and you heard Sue Baldwin talk about there can be two people buying the house, but she will only need, in order to do the Right Step program, only one may qualify for that. So only one of those parties would go on this contract and the other party would not. However, they would be put on the title and the deed. So the names of the parties buying it plus their current address. Agrees to purchase from, look up the tax record of the property and make sure you utilize those names that are on the tax records. That's what we do for a listing agreement. That's the way to put the names in here. If you put those names in here and all of a sudden it's different when you submit it to the seller's agent, find out what's going on, because there could be a power of attorney being used or whatever, but you need to utilize that. And what is their address? If you know, you may know that they are living there. You may know that they have already moved. And if you don't have that address, don't worry about that. But you must put in the property address on line 36. And always remember, shown on the municipal tax map of put it in. Most of the time, say if the seller had an address, selling property was in Brick, the municipal tax map would be in Brick. The address may be 123 Main Street, Brick, New Jersey. Shown on the municipal tax map of Brick. It sounds sometimes redundant. However, don't think of it that way. Don't think of it as being redundant. Think about it as, do people have an address of Middletown, yet they're on the municipal tax map of Red Bank? Or there is an address, there are a lot of people that live with an address of Lavalette. However, their property is on the municipal tax map of Toms River. So make sure that both of those are in that, filled in that contract, and the county. Block and lot, again, if you looked up the tax record, you will find that block and lot. It's easy if it's on the listing, you usually can check with the listing, check with Realist and find it out. Or check with Remind, but check with it and make sure you have the appropriate block and lot. Now for the purchase price. Total purchase price, we're going to put in the first block, line 44. Initial deposit. How we do it here at the O'Brien Agency is we make that initial deposit $0. And then we bring in the additional deposit 10 days after attorney review, and we'll reference that in the next page. And that is basically what their deposit is going to be. Now, this is a discussion that you have with your buyer, that are they putting down $100,000? Is that what they're putting? They're buying a $500,000 home. They're putting down $100,000, so they're putting down 20%. But there's no need that they have to put that entire 20% up front as the additional deposit. They can split it up however they choose. They could put $10,000 there as the additional deposit, and then bring $90,000 to the closing. That's balance of purchase price. Or they could want to make a strong offer, so they're putting that additional deposit, that $100,000 there as the additional deposit. Then what is the mortgage amount? You must calculate that to find out what the mortgage amount is. The mortgage amount then will be also placed in a different section in this contract. If you have put the full deposit down as additional deposit and have the mortgage number there, the document should automatically fill in 0 as the balance of purchase price, which means they're not bringing any money to closing. Again, you need to have this discussion with your buyer. Is it going to make it a strong offer by putting it all there or by putting half of it? How much? But remember, this amount, this additional deposit, that is going to be sitting in the seller's attorney's trust account. And once it's there, it cannot be released until both attorneys agree on it being released. Generally, that's released at closing. However, if there is some complication with the transaction and it falls apart, then the attorneys have to agree to release the money. If one party is questioning it, that money may be held there in the escrow. These are all things that can happen. Not very likely does it happen, but I'm just explaining that so you do know. So maybe they don't want to put $250,000 in an attorney's escrow account to sit there. If the transaction is going to take 60 days or 90 days before closing, remember that $250,000 then is sitting in a seller's attorney's escrow account. Could you have $200,000 sitting in your bank account earning some extra interest? Not a lot of interest, but I'd rather have that money than just not have any interest on it at all. So understand, this form does do calculations for you on that. Always the total price will be at the top, and the balance of the purchase price, what they're bringing to closing. Make sure that the purchase price is correct and the mortgage amount is correct. If you've got those two numbers, then additional deposit and balance of purchase price should add up. Alrighty, and again, as all documents, you have to initial. There's two places for initial. If there are 3 buyers, which there could be, if there are 4 buyers, which could be, you need to add a couple of extra blocks there and on every other page in order to make sure that they all are able to sign. Next page is line 51, starts with the manner of payment, initial deposit. Well, we just talked about that last page, that it is going to be 0. So I do not like to leave any blanks open for any misinterpretation. So I recommend on 53, checking the box other and put in NA, non-applicable, NA. That means that's very clear, then there is no initial deposit. Additional deposit. You will see here that it is a box with a date on it. It says, if left blank, then within 10 calendar days after the fully signed contract has been delivered to both buyer and seller. What we recommend is right in that, and people say, it won't take it, it won't take it. Yes, it does take it on line 57, right in 10 days after attorney review. Thus, then as soon as attorney review is concluded, now you can get the money. You have time to get the money sent to the seller's attorney. But again, remember that so you can get that additional deposit sent to the seller's attorney. Escrow. All initial and additional deposit money paid by the buyer shall be held in the escrow in a non-interest bearing trust account of, who is it going to be? It is not going to be O'Brien Realty. It will either be the buyer's attorney or the seller's attorney. Amongst the real estate attorneys, they prefer that the seller's attorney holds the escrow. You could You could write in there buyer's attorney, but I will guarantee you that 90% of the time during the attorney review process, as the attorneys are arguing or exchanging emails back and forth, that they will, in those emails, they will decide and determine that the money should be held in the trust account of the seller's attorney. So just start right away putting it in the seller's attorney. Again, this gives confidence to the seller that you are serious about this transaction and you plan on fulfilling this contract. The next one, line 66, if performance by buyer is contingent upon obtaining a mortgage. If you ever say you are preparing a contract and you're waiving all contingencies, but you have a mortgage is a contingency. So don't say you're waiving all contingencies. That means you're not making the mortgage contingent. Here again, if you have done your job correctly as a buyer's agent, you know exactly what your client wants to do as far as financing. You should know this in advance. You should know how much they are going to mortgage. That is the principal amount, as we're using in the example of $500,000 purchase price, $100,000 as the down payment. The principal amount there would read $400,000. It's very important that you identify, is this a VA, an FHA, a 203K, a conventional, or some other type of loan? Some agents don't even give this a second thought. However, when in negotiations, and one of the classes that I am teaching for continuing ed is negotiations, one of the items in this contract that is up for negotiation and that will make an impact on whether the buyer will accept this property or not is, what is the type? Because if it's a property that has a real challenge with paint peeling, broken down conditions, there may be a concern that an FHA appraisal will not make it through. So they may be concerned about that. Truly, they should not discriminate on what type of a loan it is, but it's up to the agent, their agent, to explain that to them. So basically just let them know what type is. A conventional mortgage, whereas we tend to believe a conventional is always 20% down, you can have 3% down and have it be a conventional. Conventional generally means there is no PMI, but it could be PMI depending on the circumstances. So just find out, ask your client, you want to make sure you know all the details. The term of the mortgage, you have a question? Nope, okay. Term of the mortgage, standard 30 years based on a 30-year payment schedule. Now find out from them, are they doing 30-year, are they doing 15-year? Generally, those are the two options you should put down there. Again, that's informational purposes. Please do not leave anything blank. So if you put down the principal amount, make sure and check one of those boxes. Term of mortgage 30, 30-year payment schedule. I had somebody put in a 30-year mortgage, yet it was on a 1-year payment schedule. So that means they were going to pay that 30-year loan off in 1 year. That's not quite going to work. All right, and then the next one that is extremely important is line 79. This is when the date that the mortgage commitment is due. You do need to put a date in that and a realistic date. Generally it's within 30 days after the parties agree to the terms of the contract, meaning 30 days after attorney review has concluded. Most people can do that if they're on the ball, if they've been pre-approved or pre-qualified, they've already found out what documents they have to begin getting for the mortgage banker or broker. So figure that out. If you're unsure, take a look at the closing date and that your client is deciding on, and walk back either a week to 15 days. Again, this date, that can be a negotiable item. You could put down there that it's going to take the client 45 days to get a mortgage approval. Somebody else may be saying 15 or 30 days. After 45 days, you're waiting for the buyer to get a mortgage approved, and at 45 days, they can't get it done. And now the contract ends, because if they don't do it, the contract can be canceled by the attorneys with discussion. But now 45 days later, the seller ends up now putting their house back on the market. Can the market change in 45 days? Oh, yes, it certainly can. It can change going up or going down. The seller may be very anxious because the market's even hotter 45 days, or they might be able to get more money for their property 45 days out from this contract, and they might want that. Or the property may not have retained its value, and the market may be going down, and now it's not worth as much. So that's a challenge, and they're concerned if they have to put it back on the market, they're going to lose money. So that can be a negotiable item. Let's look at the balance of purchase price. Here is where, in line 95, this is where we put the closing date. TBA or TBD does not match in this column. I've seen people put to be determined. That's nice, but to be determined, that seems like, well, it could be 6 months from now, it could be 30 days from now. People are doing that because they say, we're willing to work with the seller. So find out from the seller's agent. Again, another negotiating point, and something very wise to do, talking to the agent to see what are the seller's preferences. Does the seller want to get out as quickly as possible? Would the seller like to close in 30 days? Then put that kind of a date down there. Does the seller need extra time? So put the closing date out. Put it out 60 days or 90 days if your buyer can deal with that. The seller will looking at 3 contracts and saying that this person's giving me time to get out. This person wants to get in within 30 days, and we just can't do that. Your client will now have the better contract. A to be determined doesn't mean anything. To be determined, well, within reason, it's too vague. Put in a date. But again, put in an educated date after you've spoken with the seller's agent and gotten some more information. Again, ask as many questions of that seller's agent, especially, if you're going to be submitting an offer, contact the agent, said, we're going to be submitting an offer. I just have a couple of questions because we really want to make as strong as offer as possible for the seller. So is the seller looking to close any particular time? My buyer is flexible and I'm more than happy to work. So what can we put in the contract to make the seller happy on a closing date? That's really good. That's luring that seller's agent into a false sense of security, because the next thing you're going to do is be able to go in for the kill on a better price. All negotiations. So Number 4 is sufficient assets. You're saying that the buyer represents that they have sufficient assets in order to close. If this is a cash transaction, you need to be sending over proof. Please don't send over bank statements. Bank statements, even though you can redact with a black magic marker their account numbers, there are programs, computer programs out there that can pull out that blank and see underneath, see the numbers underneath. You know, a hacker gets a hold of that information, they get a hold of the account. You've got to be protecting your client at all times. When I worked in New York, one of the agent's computers was hacked. They got the client's bank numbers, and the next day they had it over $1 million in that bank account, and it was wiped out by the hacker. The money was gone. So protect your client. What you need for sufficient assets for a cash transaction is a letter from the bank with the person's name and phone number stating that this person has an account with our bank, has sufficient assets to close a transaction price of the base price of such and such, the price that you're negotiated out, or you're going to negotiate out. So that proves that they have the cash. And let the person know that writes the letter, and let the seller's agent know. You may call this number to question them to make sure that we have the assets. We're giving you that information so you can do that. Accurate disclosure of selling price. Number 5, this is that the buyer and the seller are certifying that the contract accurately reflects the gross sale price. So this is a line stating, implying there's no money being passed underneath the table. There's no suitcase of money. There's no, we're buying this property for $995,000, and then on the side you're going to give them an extra $110,000, $105,000 because you want to avoid the millionaire's tax. No. Accurate disclosure of selling prices in this contract. And remember, your clients are signing this contract. It's very significant. They're putting it towards attorneys. Items included in the sale, make sure you find out all, double check. People just put as per MLS agreement, copy exactly word for word from the MLS listing agreement what it says and put it in here as included in the sale. And then put as per MLS listing number and put in the number. And what I would do for safekeeping, because an agent can go in at any time and make those changes, you could put that in, and then the people are packing and they change their mind. Well, I want to keep this sandal, I don't want to give it to them. So they just leave it, and the agent goes in and changes the MLS agreement. So when the buyer's agent said, it's in the MLS agreement, as you look at it, says, no, it's not. There's ways to get around it, but when you copy it, print it out, make it a part of the .loop file. Very important. Put it in that file. Items excluded from sale. Again, exactly what it says on the MLS sheet. If it says nothing, put in nothing excluded according to the MLS sheet, Very simple to do that, but make sure you're very clear. Do not leave those spaces blank. Dates and times of performance. They're agreeing that all dates and times included in this contract are of the essence, meaning time is of the essence. Basically, we're asking them to perform. Both parties are asking to be performed. However, there may be an issue where parties are delayed and an attorney will ask for or put forth time of the essence, which means the attorney is giving notice to the other side. They must come on or before such and such a date to close the transaction, or the transaction will be canceled. Attorneys do not do that lightly because they want to make sure that the contract goes through. But if it gets to that, you need to step it up with with your buyer or your seller, whoever is lagging. Certificate of occupancy and zoning compliance in the state of New Jersey. Before any property can be transferred ownership or even transferred occupancy. Ownership is buying, but occupancy is if you're leasing. Again, before you lease to a new person, you must have a certificate of occupancy. So certificate of occupancy and zoning compliance, we are putting in this slot actual. However, if the expense exceeds, we're putting in the term actual to the seller, then the seller may terminate the contract and refund the buyer all deposit monies. So the seller needs to pay for the repairs. Even though the seller may say it's an as-is, the CO is responsibility of the buyer, still complete that expense exceeds actual, and then allow the attorneys to take care of the language in it. Municipal assessment. Seller represents that the seller has or has not notified of any such municipal assessments as explained in this section. Understand what a municipal assessment is. You may ask, you may already know. Generally, the seller's agent will have already notified you if you are preparing an offer to purchase. However, there may be assessments that the seller's agent doesn't know. So just make sure and double check, do some checking in the town as well. A municipal assessment may mean that they have replaced or are planning on replacing the road or replacing a gas line in the street. This gas line is only for the benefit of these people in the neighborhood, is not for the benefit of everyone in the municipality. So the municipality is not going to pay for this gas line or this new street. It is going to, because neighbors that live across town, they're not getting any benefit from this. So why should their tax dollars pay for it? So the municipality gives a special assessment to all the people that are benefiting from that, that improvement, as it were. So some of these assessments are put in place. The buyer may have paid for it already, or excuse me, the seller may have paid for it already, or the seller may have owed it and not paid for it, and they're trying to sell it so they don't have to. And the buyer may buy it without noticing it, and then all of a sudden they're hit with a $10,000, $100,000 assessment that they had no idea was coming. So the seller represents the seller has or has not been notified of any municipal assessments. Make sure you have that correct. It's a minor detail, but it could be important. Quality and insurable of title. It's basically every contract, every purchase, there is going to be a title search. Even a refinance, there is going to be a title search. And the title search just is a checking back in the history to make sure that there are no liens against the property by any individuals or by any government entities. Every time it closes, there's a title. If the quality and the title are not insurable, this contract cannot go forth. So this sale is subject to utility and other easement restrictions of record. Find out those as well. Find out. I lived in a property where there was an easement going across my backyard, a utility easement. I had to make sure and notify that. That had to be made sure that was in the title works, and it was. But make sure that you understand this and and helping your client purchase the property, making sure your seller knows that they needed to disclose this. Line 181. What is the property that is being sold? Is it land, a lot, a single family residential dwelling, or is it a single family piece of land? Is it a 2-family? Is it a 3-family? Is it a 4-family? That's what it goes. Single, 1, 2, 3, 4, or put in land. That is what we need in that space, just to declare. Because remember, as I said earlier, you are not allowed to prepare a contract for anything over a 4-family dwelling. Possession and occupancy and tenancies. Really important with this, possession of occupancy. If there are tenants in the property, they need to be disclosed. So is this applicable or not applicable? Oftentimes it's not applicable, but if you're selling a property with tenants in it, you must provide the tenants' names, location. Location may be they live in unit 2A or they live in unit 2B, they live in a 3A, for whatever the location is. What is the current rent? What security deposit do you have, and what is the term of their lease? Are they on a 1-year lease? Are they on a month-to-month lease? It would be important if you knew, you could find out what the ending date. 1-year lease ends on such and such a date. But always understand, if there are tenants in the property, very important, the lease always survives the closing. Tenant's lease always survives the closing, no matter whether it is a 1-year, 2-year, 5-year, 1 month. A month-to-month tenant is on a month-to-month lease. They have a lease because every time they pay their rent, they are basically extending their lease for 30 days. So if you think you're going to buy the property and then the tenants are going to have to move as soon as you close, that's not correct. Only if there was negotiations. The buyer can possibly ask the seller to offer to pay them back their security and pay them an extra month's rent in order to move out early. There's negotiations there. But again, if there's tenants in the property, they need to be put in this contract so they're clearly identified. Lead-based paint hazard, is it applicable, non-applicable? If the property was built after 1978, then it absolutely is non-applicable. We have no lead paint hazard here because they stopped using lead in paint in 1978. So if it's 1979, 1980, again, by the rules. However, who knows, somebody could have actually, built it in 1979, but used paint they had in their warehouse that was made in 78 with lead in it. One of the things that is oftentimes forgotten is that if people buy a house, fix it up, but they completely gut it, they take it down to the studs. The house was built in 1960. But all they left was a shell of a home. And then they've done everything new. Well, it's basically like a new home. However, since the home was built prior to 1978, and it was more than likely painted inside, that paint could still be, the dust of that paint is problematic when inhaled. The paint could have gotten into the soil around the house as they were destroying the inside, as they were gutting the house. Thus, it's very important, you should still put forth a lead-based paint hazard form to be on the safe side. Lead-based paint form is a federal policy. It's not a state of New Jersey. The disclosure of lead-based paint is a federal law, so we do need to respect this. And there's all the items about the warning statement, the inspection. The parties can choose to have a 10-day inspection review. The amendment shall provide the seller agrees to correct the deficiencies and furnish the buyer with certification. Thus, if there is lead paint in there found with a certification from a certified inspector risk assessor that the deficiencies have been corrected before the closing, seller shall have, and again, it's a blank, how many days you want, business days after the receipt of the amendment. This is something that is a number that can be chosen. Do they want 10 days? Do they want 15 days? But when you see these blanks and it says if left blank, then 3, that number, if left blank, then 3, that is the number that the attorneys that have developed this contract of sale, this fill in the blank contract, that is the number that they have deemed to be sufficient and fair. So you can always, when you have a blank, it says after it, then 3, you can always assume that the best number to put in there is 3 unless your client wants another one. So put in the number 3 there, put in the number 3 in the next blank. Point of entry treatment system or POET system. This is a type of water treatment system used to remove contaminants in water from a structure from a potable well. Make sure and ask about this. If the property has a well, make sure and check, is there a POET system in there? If there's no well, then obviously it's not applicable. If there's a well, but it's just for watering the lawn purposes only, you do not need to worry about that because it's not potable water. Potable water means it's water that is going to be drank by the family, by the occupants of the property. So it's not applicable. If it's applicable, if there is a well for potable water on the property, remember it is always the seller's responsibility to produce certification that the water is potable. That can be $500-600 test, seller's responsibility. And at closing, the seller will sign off on it and the buyer will be asked to sign off on it as well. Here are the water test results. Cesspool requirement. Again, this contract, you think, well, how many cesspools do we find around here? Maybe as far out rural as Colts Neck, we might find them. Jackson, we might find them. More South Jersey. But remember, when this contract is written, this contract has been prepared by attorneys that are taking the entire state of New Jersey into consideration. And there are a lot of properties in the Pinelands area in southern New Jersey that still utilize cesspools to this day. A cesspool is a very, 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 very old system of getting rid of sewage. It went from cesspool to septic tank to public sewer system. So again, if it's a very old property, a very old house, and the house has been there since the 1800s, ask. I sold a property that was built in the late 1800s. It was the original Jackson General Store. There was a cesspool on the property, so I had to declare it as applicable. However, the cesspool had been abandoned and there was a septic system put in. So again, declare it, but understand. Most of the time you're going to find that this is non-applicable. So once you check off non-applicable on line 54, you can skip through. You do not need to put on 261, a check mark on 261, 264, 277. You do not need to do that. Number 16th in line 270, this is the inspection contingency clause. Again, we are talking about another contingency. If you've waived all contingencies, you may be waiving your right to an inspection. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit right now about as is. When some seller's agent puts in the notes on the property in the MLS sheet that the property is being sold as is, that's because their owners are saying they do not want to make any repairs on the property. They're not going to entertain you coming in and inspecting and saying that, oh, there's a crack in the ceiling that needs to be repaired, or there's a leaky faucet, I want that repaired, etc. As is what every contract is in the state of New Jersey. This is considered an as-is fill-in-the-blank contract. However, the owner does not choose to pay for any repairs. That is their prerogative. However, it does not waive your right to a home inspection. It basically is telling you that you can do a home inspection, however, we're not making any repairs. However, it is very important to understand that structural, topographical, environmental components of the property, radon, lead, etc., those are outside of this clause. The inspection clause has issues in it when we go down and we read through it about radon gas, etc., about wood boring insects. Again, there's the 14 days there and the 7 days. These things are things that can seriously impact your mortgage if you're paying a mortgage. So you are still protected. Even if you waive your right to request any repairs through inspection, do not waive your right to an inspection, because you need to make sure if there are wood destroying insects, if there is a structural issue in the property. But property, personal items, personal property or built-in, such as stoves, roofs, etc., things that are at their end of their life, but they are still functioning, you can waive your right to repair them. You know that you have to. Although if a roof is leaking, you need to look at the roof. That could come under structural, or it could be just a minor repair. But again, unless you are so certain this house is in the best working order, you want to encourage your client to have a home inspection just for their own purposes. And if the seller's agent and the sellers are nutty about it and saying it's an as is, you can say, we understand clearly this is an as-is sale. However, we want to do an inspection for our own informational purposes. So make sure that that's clear. If that is not the statement, there are specific timeframes when the inspection has to be done. The inspection must be done completed within 14 calendar days after the close of attorney review. Then they have that time. Once they have it done, they have time to now communicate it to the attorney and present it to the other side. That other side now has 7 days in which to determine whether they are going to cure or not cure. So the time period, the seller shall have 7 business days. Notice before it was 14 calendar days. Now the responsibility to cure is 7 business days after the receipt of the report. So those 7 days applies to response time. They have the 7 days in which to confirm in writing what they are going to do. Are they going to cure the problem? Are they not going to cure the problem? But they must respond within 7 days. And when they respond in 7 days, now the buyer's attorney must respond back within 7 business days. Remember, business days exclude Saturday, Sunday, and legal holidays, just like the attorney review section. So keep track of those timelines. I kept track of timelines. However, an attorney that I worked with did not pay attention to these timelines and did not pay attention to this contract. He telephoned the buyer's attorney. They agreed on everything on the telephone, and he didn't commit it to writing. On day 8, the seller's attorney sent in writing to the buyer's attorney sent in writing to my client's attorney that since you did not respond in writing within 7 days, we are canceling this transaction. Boom. Nothing more could be done. The transaction was done. My clients were very upset, but I said, it was your attorney's choice not to put it in writing. So you can keep that attorney or you may choose another one, but we now have to go back and we have to find a new buyer for the property. Flood hazard area. Again, we have this issue. The federal and state governments have designated flood areas. If the property is located in a flood area, again, you need to disclose that. If buyer require reveals that the property is in a flood area, they can cancel the contract within 10 calendar days. Know your flood status of the property and make sure and make it relevant right up front, so it doesn't risk the cancellation of the contract. A couple more things, and then we will move on to this on next week's Loop Hour. Qualification of inspectors. When you hire an inspector, don't let the buyer hire their cousin Joe because he knows a lot about houses. Make sure you hire somebody that is a qualified inspector, that they do. I allowed my client, because they insisted that they were going to have their friend who was a termite inspector do their full inspection. He missed a few things that they found after the closing, and they came to me and they said, can we go after them because there's these issues with the house? I said, no, you cannot. I was very clear when we reviewed this contract. I explained, do not hire your cousin Joe, because that's what I always say, that's my term. And you chose to hire who you did, not a qualified inspector, so you have no recourse on this. Megan's Law statement, understand that under New Jersey law, only the county prosecutor determines whether and how to provide notice of presence of convicted sex offenders. So you cannot disclose to your clients that there may be a Megan's Law sex offender living in the neighborhood. Whether you are the buyer's agent or the seller's agent, you are absolutely forbidden from disclosing this information. The buyer is notified by this contract that New Jersey law establishes an internet registry of sex offenders. That's where they can go check. Otherwise, you have no information and cannot disclose that information. Notice requiring off-site conditions. Please make sure if there is a landfill, if there is an airport, if there is a racetrack or something within the area of the house, and I was, if it's a racetrack and you can hear it a mile away, yeah, disclose that. If some people, if they're moving down from New York and they don't know where they are in this area, they don't know these hazards. Make sure and disclose of off-site conditions. It could be a landfill that was designated a Superfund site. So there were toxic chemicals put in the land. Very important to make that notification. The seller's agent should be making sure that they make this declaration. And this is a problem with, if you're a buyer's agent and you're working in an area outside of the area, you really need to do some investigation, because if you are working in, decide to go and sell some property, work with buyers down in Burlington County, and you don't know where there's off-site conditions and they haven't disclosed it, you could have an issue, because your client could say, you never told me that there was a garbage dump around the corner, because you sell to them in February. You don't smell it in February, but in August, oh my God, you smell it every day. So make sure you know your area. And air safety and zoning notice, just notify that here are the municipalities with airports, and that they need to be aware that where these airports are, so they can know if they are in the flight path or not. All right, that will do it for today. We will begin next week with the Bulk Sales Act, section 21, line 455. Does anybody have any questions before I conclude today? It's important for you as a seller's agent to understand this contract, because you will be explaining it to your seller when one comes to you. It's important as a buyer's agent to know this contract, so when you're working with your buyer and completing it, that you can explain it to them briefly, so they don't have to spend an hour or overnight reading it or consulting an attorney, that they are confident that they can sign it and send it on to their attorney for review. Questions?
John, I have a question real quick.
Sure.
Percolation test, is that the seller's responsibility too, as well? Like the water, like the well?
A perk test, I'm moving because of the little sun in my eyes. A percolation test has to do with the rate that the soil will absorb the water or the overflow from the septic system. The septic system is the responsibility of the buyer to have that inspected. So that cost would be on the buyer, because with septic tank and related, that's on the buyer.
Okay, thank you.
You're
John,
welcome.
I have a question.
Yes, Alice.
So if they have an inspection and there's issues at the inspection, and the seller says they're going to fix everything, do you have the inspector come back and re-inspect it, or are you just going through the house looking at everything?
You can do one of several things. You can ask the inspector to come back and check it. That may be an additional fee for your client, but it's a good comfort level for them to spend that little bit of extra money. Or you can ask for receipts to make sure that they have checked off everything, that they have repaired everything. And you can have a checklist or a punch list to go through the house prior to, and I would do this prior to the final walkthrough, to make sure that they have completed these items. One thing that, if you ask for receipts, sometimes receipts do not tell the whole story. Unfortunately, I purchased a property once where I believed the receipts. There was a leak in the roof that the seller was supposed to repair. There was a receipt that they repaired that. They repaired the ceiling. They only repaired the ceiling where the water had leaked in. They had not repaired the roof. A month later, when it rained, again, there was a spot in the same area that it came. They never repeat. Even though the receipt said they repaired the roof, they never repaired the roof. I took possession of the property, so once the property closes, I own it, I own everything, I agreed to everything. Nothing survives the closing except for a lease. All right? Does that
Okay.
help you, Allison?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Great. Thank you all for coming to this Dot Loop Hour, and I hope you learned something. We will complete this next week, and we will just double check some of the other items under the buyer's side of the Dot Loop. Go back, check your loops, double check your loops, make sure you're submitting to Micah every time. So when it's time for the closing, all you end up submitting is the check, the closing disclosure, and the commission bill, so you can get paid. That everything else has been reviewed and approved and is completed, so the closing is smooth. All right? Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, you too.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John. Bye.
Thank you.